Welcome everyone to week 2 of PQP2 with Lakehead University. I would like to acknowledge that we are today located on the traditional territory of the Fort William First Nation, and we're up at Hillcrest Park. So for those of you who know Thunder Bay, it's one of our tourist areas, I guess, but a nice place to spend a sunny afternoon. We would like to highlight a couple of things as we move through things that we read in Module 1 and then position you up to get ready to start Module 2. I pulled a few quotes out of the Simon Sinek video that you watched. One was, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And then we talked about the Wright brothers, or he talked about the Wright brothers, where they're driven by a cause, by a purpose, and by a belief. So I found those two things to me were kind of the most important pieces that I pulled out of it, because it really allowed me to think about the why. So when we think about leading, we think about leading from the why. And so when we think about the what, those are the results that we're aiming for, but how we get there can be such a variety of ways. And I think that's really a broad question. And I wanted to share with you an example of a situation. I use strength circles a lot when I work with staff and with students. And one of the times we were really wrestling with a new concept. We had brought it forward from the ministry to the board and the board to the principals, and then I brought it forward into my school. And in the staff, we were having some stress with it. It was causing some angst, it was causing some frustration, and I could see as we were trying to engage in this learning process that it was really going to come to a head that wasn't going to be very healthy for anybody. So I called a timeout, like a literal timeout, and I just asked everyone to pull their chairs into a circle. So we got out of the tables, pushed the tables to the side of the room, and everyone came together in the circle. So for everyone, that would have been about 22 people in my group there. And we did a quick round, just a relaxed round, like favorite food or something funny that happened, but just to try to break the ice a little bit, because people were at a more high level of stress. Was stress. But then I asked the question, talk to me or share with us why you became a teacher. And I shared why I became a teacher. And one by one, people went around the room and shared why they decided to become a teacher. And in all fairness, people joke that, oh, it's for the summer holidays or it's for the break at Christmas, but really it was none of that, as it rarely is. It was about the moral purpose and the reason why we work long hours and why we struggle through things and why we call parents on weekends and why we sit and plan with our peers into the evening. And it was about making a difference for kids. It was about that opportunity that every child deserves a chance, and the belief that I as an individual person can help make that come to fruition for every child. And as people talked about that moral reason and the moral purpose, I then was able to bring it back to the concept that we were looking at. And that was the why we were engaging in that new learning. Learning is hard. We know that. It's a struggle. And if we're not struggling, it's not new learning. And it was amazing. After that moment, once everyone figured out the why are we doing this, the what became almost a non-issue, and we worked on that for the rest of the year. So I just wanted to share that with you because new learning is hard.
And just to take a moment and piggyback off of that thought, a similar experience myself, because one of the reasons I think this is so important, this leading from the why, it really speaks to our ideas and notions about implementation. And anybody working in education right now in Ontario, I know you're experiencing, of course, there's a new math strategy, there's been several different frameworks and policy and programs that we've worked to implement over this. I've been in this now 15 years here. And watched a lot of things come and go, whether it was FDK or other initiatives and things that your boards are doing. So there's always really good thoughts and research about what we want to do and even the how of what we want to do it. And then we seem to struggle sometimes, though, with going back to the why. And I really believe that if we centrally lead from the why, we're going to have a much better success rate of making sure our how and our what are valuable and get us moving in the right direction. And a similar story, amongst a group, we're implementing a new initiative, and it's quite new. It's quite out of the box. It's a very broad-based strategy, and it's really got at its heart quite a moral purpose on engaging children and really changing the way education is reflected for many children. So we were at the table, though, and people were really struggling with the different ways in which they were going about it. So there were some that felt their how was not as adequate as other how, and there was a lot of discussion, a lot of angst, and I said, could we just pause for a moment and can we go back to why did we decide to do this in the first place? What was our purpose in bringing forward this initiative? And so we all paused, and then that came back out, and I said, now what we want to ask ourselves is how and what we are doing is getting at that why. And if it is, then we're okay. And if it's all a different way to get there, then we're fine. But I think if we keep reflecting ourselves back to that position, we really will. And I think back, one of my favorite quotes out of the Cynic video was Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream, not I have a plan." And we often walk into a building or a place or a space or they've got a problem and I got a plan. And the problem with that is that we probably failed to figure out, go back to that core again. I'll go back with you to that moral purpose of why we're here. And is our plan going to be reflected in all the other whys? Because if it's not, then you're gonna get into a situation. For those of you who are coming to us from part 1 last year, you got a chance to look at another Simon Sinek video. And if you worked with us, I would ask that you go and find it. It's called Why Good Leaders Make People Feel Safe. And that talks about building in that safe space, that inclusive environment, that place of trust where people that you are leading feel they have the ability to take risk and feel they can speak with some autonomy. That piece is really, that's getting at people with that why. Because if you haven't done that in that safe, inclusive space, and you don't understand all the people that are working with you, that top-down leadership, I have a plan, isn't going to work. And I think you've probably all, I've seen from some of your posts, you've all experienced that type of leadership where this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it. And there's a time and place for this is what we can do, this is how we might get at it. But if you've got not everybody's on the same page of that why, then you're going to have some real struggles. So I think that's really important. So I would encourage you, if you weren't in our part 1 course, to go back and take a look at that Cynic video as well. And it's called How Good Leaders Make People Feel Safe. That's really, really important. But the bigger question here for me, and I'd like you to think about it as we go into part 2 this time, is about implementation, because there's a lot of implementation going on in our province. And those of you that are out of province or haven't experienced it, I'm sure there's similar things happening in your education jurisdictions. But do you think that we lead change from the why or more from the what and the how? And I just put that out there as a reflective question. You can comment on it if you'd like in some of your posts, or you can just use it as a guide yourself. But I think I'm asking myself that, and I think that it's a good place for us to start from.
So as we move into that, when we talk about collaboration, we saw a variety of ways that you had experienced collaboration with other teachers, as part of a school team, through PLCs, or in other areas outside of the actual classroom. So we really want to think about how you as a leader encourage that collaboration, and think about the specific ways that so now I'm going into the what and the how, but it is important that you actually have an arsenal of things at your disposal. That's maybe not the best word, arsenal, but really, so that in this situation, when you see that this is the why, you know that you have 4 or 5 ways you could bring forward as the how. Because working with other people, it's not always going to look the same. In actually fact, it will always look different. And every single time will have a slightly different path that you take. So it's important to have some specific things that you say, I saw this somewhere, do you think maybe we could try this out? Okay, does it work here? Sure. If you have buy-in, let's try it. But then let's actually monitor it as well to see, is it actually having the intended outcome that we hope it will have? So we really want you to think about that. Document that somewhere for yourself so that you can keep track of that learning, so that you can build that bank for yourself, or the toolbox. That's maybe a nicer way to say it. But so that you can pull out, these 3 tools you think are your best chance at getting to where you want to get to.
And I think, along with that toolbox piece, we come back to those of you reflecting on the Ontario Leadership Framework, that accountability piece. And accountability kind of gets a bad name sometimes. I think people get all quite hung up on the idea of standardized tests, or things that make teachers uncomfortable, or make even the public uncomfortable, or things that get misused. But the reality of it is, if we don't build in a way to measure the what and how we're doing, and see whether it's actually effective, then we can do all the how we want, and we might not ever get anywhere. So it's very critical that when you are thinking about your toolbox and those things that you've got in it, or other people are bringing to you, you ask that question. Okay, so there's a how, but how are we going to measure? How are we going to know if that was effective and got the what for us? because if it doesn't, then you're going to really, you end up doing a lot of work, and it can be a lot of good work, solid research-based work, but isn't what was needed at that time in that situation.
Yes. It maybe it's like having open heart surgery is what you need, but in actual fact, they'll be treating you for diabetes.
Right.
Really
Exactly.
good solid practices.
Yep.
You know, everything is top tier, top notch, but it's actually not treating the right issue that needs to be treated.
Right.
So if you can think of it as that important.
Mm-hmm.
As we move forward into Module 2, we'll really be looking at those relationships. We want you to be thinking about that safe, inclusive environment and building that trust as a leader and motivating people. And what are you going to do? How are you going to do that? Thinking about the theory behind it, thinking about your actions behind it, like linking it into the leadership framework. And we want you to really think about those structures in education, because we all work in educational systems that to some degree are set up the way they're set up. However, that doesn't mean that we have to always, okay, don't get in trouble, but wait, doesn't mean that we can't move within those structures to create a place of equity, a place of inclusive, a place of a decolonized learning space for your students and your families and your staff. We really do have a lot of autonomy as school leaders to think, what kind of place do we want our schools to be? And what kind of space do we want it to be for all students and all families and all staff? So that's what this module really asks you to dig into a little bit, is really thinking about what kind of space and place can you create.
And there's some, there's a lot of current educational theorists, you might see me quote in some of my responses right now, that are saying that really the moral purpose of the principalship is and should be social justice. And so you'll see we're starting to introduce you to some things like decolonizing space. We're starting to talk about how you create equitable and inclusive environments. And we want you to really think about it. And though it's true, we do have an existing structure. Structures do shift and change. And some of the best opportunities to try that is in small spaces like schools, an opportunity to think about what kinds of structures are in place and which ones do I have control over that I can move and change. Because really that's getting back at that sort of moral purpose, that moral why we're here, and really thinking social justice framework. So you're going to get an opportunity to delve deeply into some of these issues that I think will bring you to start to recognize that the idea of a safe and inclusive and welcoming environment, which is in many of our policy frameworks right now, is a pretty lofty goal, and it takes some real hard critical work and some real critical reflection to get to that space.
So on that note, we're going to wish you the best over the next week, and we really look forward to reading about Module 2 and all the things that you find in there. Once again, you can go back and continue to comment on Module 1. So if there's still things pressing, or if you think of something in Module 2 and you think, oh, I want to respond to so-and-so about that, please feel free to go back and do so.
Yeah, and we hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend. That was for Canadians. It was a lovely holiday and an opportunity to spend some time with friends and or family. And we will see you next week.